Aliens spent centuries on a dead language. Then a human veteran clarified it. The Galactic Archive of Prime was the oldest building in the known universe that was still standing. It had been built 11,000 years ago by a species called and it had survived wars, natural disasters, and the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. The building was made of a special crystal that could repair itself when damaged. It glowed with a soft blue light that never went out, day or night. Inside the archive were millions of books, records, and artifacts from hundreds of different alien species. Some of these species were still alive and traveling through space. Others had died out long ago, leaving nothing behind except their stories and their strange objects. But there was one collection in the archive that was different from all the others. It was kept in the deepest part of the building, behind doors that could only be opened by the highest members of the government. This collection was called the Tablets, and they had been driving the galaxy's people crazy for over 300 years. Counselor walked slowly down the long hallway that led to the tablet chamber. He was which meant he had pale blue skin, 4 arms, and eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. He was also very old, even by standards. He had spent 312 years of his life trying to understand what the tablets said, and he had failed every single time. His assistant, a young woman named, walked beside him. She was nervous, and could tell because her skin kept changing to slightly darker shades of blue. "The human transport has entered our atmosphere," said. "They will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. Made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a growl. "Tell me again why the humans are sending a soldier instead of a scientist." "I do not know, Counselor. The message from Earth only said they were sending their best person for the job. They did not explain what that meant." "Their best person," repeated. "We have had the best linguists from 47 different species working on these tablets. We have used the most advanced computers in the galaxy. We have even asked them to try reading the thoughts that might still be attached to the stones. Nothing has worked. And now the humans, who have only been traveling through space for 300 years, think they can solve our problem by sending us a soldier." Did not say anything. She had learned long ago that when Counselor was in a bad mood, it was better to stay quiet. They reached the tablet chamber and placed his hand on the door panel. The door recognized his genetic signature and slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the chamber was filled with floating holographic displays, each one showing different images of the tablets from different angles. The tablets themselves were kept in a special case in the center of the room. They were flat pieces of stone, about the size of a human dinner plate, and they were covered with strange symbols that no one could read. The symbols looked like a cross between writing and artwork. Some of them were simple lines and curves. Others were complex patterns that seemed to change depending on how you looked at them. Walked to the case and stared down at the tablets for what must have been the millionth time in his long life. He knew every scratch, every mark, every tiny imperfection in the stone. He had memorized the patterns so completely that he saw them in his dreams. And still they made no sense. There had been a species that lived 8,000 years before any of the current galactic civilizations had learned to fly. They had built cities, created art, and developed technology that was impressive even by modern standards. And then, one day, they had simply disappeared. No one knew why. No one knew where they went. All that remained were a few ruins, some broken machines, and these tablets. For 300 years, the tablets had been the greatest puzzle in the galaxy. Every species had tried to translate them. Every language expert, every code breaker, every artificial intelligence program had been given a chance to figure out what the symbols meant. None of them had succeeded. The symbols seemed to follow rules, but the rules kept changing. Sometimes a symbol would mean one thing, and sometimes it would mean something completely different. Sometimes patterns would repeat, and sometimes they would not. It was as if they had deliberately created a language that could not be understood by anyone except themselves. And now the humans thought they could solve it. shook his head and turned away from the tablets. He had 40 minutes before the human arrived. He decided to use that time to review the files one more time, even though he already knew everything in them by heart. The human transport landed on the platform outside the archive exactly on time, watched through a window as the small, plain-looking ship settled down on its landing legs. It was not an impressive ship. It had no decorations, no special features, nothing that made it stand out. It was simply a machine designed to get from one place to another. The door of the ship opened, and a ramp extended down to the platform. A single figure walked down the ramp and stopped at the bottom, looking around at the archive with what seemed like genuine interest. The human was female, shorter than had expected. She had dark hair that was cut very short, and there were lines on her face that suggested she had lived a difficult life. She was wearing simple clothes in dark colors, nothing fancy or formal, but what caught attention was her left arm. It was not made of flesh and bone. It was a mechanical prosthetic, made of dark metal that gleamed in the light of the twin suns. Appeared at side. "Shall I bring her to the meeting room, counselor?" "No," said. "Bring her directly to the tablet chamber. If she is here to waste our time, I want to know immediately." Nodded and left to meet the human. A few minutes later, the door to the tablet chamber opened and entered with the human following behind her. Up close, could see that the human's eyes were brown and very alert. They moved around the room quickly, taking in every detail, analyzing everything they saw. These were not the eyes of a simple soldier. These were the eyes of someone who was used to looking for things that other people missed. "Counselor," the human said. Her voice was calm and steady. "I am Sergeant Major, retired. Thank you for allowing me to come here." "You are from the Earth military?" asked, not bothering to hide the doubt in his voice. "I was 22 years in the Linguistic Intelligence Division. My job was breaking enemy codes and translating captured communications." Secondary eyes blinked in surprise. Linguistic intelligence. I was not aware that Earth had such a division. "Most people are not aware of it, that is the point," smiled slightly. "We prefer to work quietly." "And you believe that your experience breaking military codes will help you translate an 8,000-year-old dead language?" "I do not know yet," said honestly, "but I would like to see the tablets before I make any judgments." Studied her for a moment. There was something about this human that he had not expected. She was not arrogant or boastful. She did not claim to have all the answers. She simply wanted to look at the problem and see what she could see. He stepped aside and gestured toward the display case. "The tablets, everything we know about them is in the files that were sent to your government." Walked slowly toward the case. She did not rush. She moved like someone who had learned to be patient, who understood that some things could not be hurried. When she reached the case, she stood very still and looked down at the tablets without speaking. A full minute passed, then another. Shifted nervously but held up a hand to keep her quiet. He wanted to see what the human would do. Finally spoke. "You have been treating this as a linguistic problem." "Of course," said. "The tablets contain writing. Writing is language. Language can be translated." "That is one way to think about it," turned to face him. "But there is another way." "Which is?" "These are not public documents. They were not carved on monuments or written in books meant for everyone to read. They were found in private homes, in personal spaces. They were kept by their beds." Nodded. "Yes, that is correct. We believe they may have been religious objects or perhaps records of family histories. Or perhaps something else entirely." Looked back at the tablets. "Counselor, I have spent my entire adult life reading things that people did not want me to read. Military codes, secret messages, private communications. Do you know what all of those things have in common?" "Tell me." "They were all created by people who were afraid. Afraid that their enemies would find out their plans. Afraid that their secrets would be discovered. Afraid that someone would learn things about them that they did not want anyone to know." Considered this. You believe that we're afraid of something. I believe that we're afraid of each other. Walked around the display case, looking at the tablets from different angles. You said they lived in large family groups, 30 to 50 individuals in each home. Very social, very connected, always surrounded by other people. That is what the archaeological evidence suggests. And these tablets were kept in private rooms, personal spaces, the only places wherein could be alone. Stopped walking and looked directly at. Counselor, what if these tablets are not written in the language at all? What if they are written in a code that each created for themselves? The chamber went very quiet, made a small sound of surprise, felt something shift in his mind like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that each tablet is written in a different code, a personal cipher used by only one individual. Yes, that is exactly what I am suggesting. His voice grew more confident as she spoke. Think about it. You live in a society where everyone is always together. You have no privacy, no secrets, no place to hide your true feelings. But everyone needs privacy sometimes. Everyone has thoughts they cannot share, feelings they cannot express out loud. So what do? You create a way to write things down that no one else can read, said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Exactly. A personal code. A secret language that belongs only to you. Not because you are hiding military secrets or criminal activities, but simply because you need a place where you can be honest with yourself. Walked to the central display and pulled up the analysis files that his team had compiled over the centuries. We noticed that the symbols varied from tablet to tablet. We assumed this was regional variation, or changes in the language over time. But if each tablet was written by a different person using their own personal code, then there is no single key to crack them all. Finished. You have been looking for one answer when there are actually hundreds of different answers, one for each tablet. This makes the problem much more difficult, said. If each tablet is unique, how can we possibly translate any of them? Smiled. That is where my experience comes in. Military codes are designed to be difficult, but they are also designed to be used. They have to be practical. They have to be something that a person can remember and use quickly. Personal codes are the same way. They follow patterns that make sense to the person who created them. She pointed to the central tablet, the one that had been studied the most. Tell me about the person who owned this tablet, not the language, not the symbols, the person. Pulled up the archaeological report. This tablet was found in a residential structure on the. It was in a small chamber, probably a personal room. There were other objects nearby, decorative items, what appeared to be a musical instrument and biological remains. The remains, what did they show? An elderly individual, one of the oldest specimens we have ever found. The bone structure suggested someone who had lived a very long life. Nodded slowly. An old person, living with family, keeping a private journal in a language only they could understand. She paused, and something changed in her expression. It became softer, more thoughtful. What do old people write about when they know no one will ever read it? I do not know, admitted. Memories, regrets, hopes for the future. All of those things, and something else too. Walked to a chair and sat down, her eyes never leaving the tablet. When I was deployed overseas, I kept a journal. I wrote in it every night before I went asleep, but I did not write in normal English. I created my own shorthand, my own symbols for things I could not put into regular words, things I felt but could not explain, things I saw but could not describe. Why? Asked. Because I was surrounded by other soldiers every day. I had no privacy, no place where I could be alone with my thoughts. The journal was my escape, the only place where I could be completely honest about what I was feeling. Looked at. I think the grandmother who wrote this tablet did the same thing. She created a code not because she was trying to hide military secrets, but because she needed a space where she could tell the truth about herself. The chamber fell silent again. realized that in 300 years of studying the tablets, no one had ever approached the problem this way. They had all been looking for linguistic patterns, mathematical relationships, logical structures. None of them had thought to look for emotions. "How would you begin?" he asked quietly. Turn back to the tablet. I would start by looking for the words she would have used most often, not nouns or verbs but feelings. Love, sadness, loneliness, hope, fear. These are the anchors. Once I find them, I can start to understand everything else. That could take years. Maybe, or maybe not, smiled again. I am very good at my job, counselor, and I have a lot of experience understanding people who did not want to be understood. Made a decision. Very well. You may have access to the tablets and all of our research files. We'll assign you a workspace and whatever assistance you need. But I warn you, Sergeant Major, many brilliant people have tried to solve this puzzle. All of them have failed. I know, said, but none of them were soldiers. None of them knew what it felt like to be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. That is my advantage. She stood up and walked back to the display case, looking down at the ancient stone with an expression that could not quite read. It was not arrogance. It was not confidence. It was something more like recognition, like she was seeing something familiar in those strange symbols. I will begin immediately, she said. The first week was difficult. Spent most of her time simply looking at the tablets, studying the patterns, trying to get a feel for the person who had written them. She did not use computers or analysis programs. She just sat and looked. Thought she was wasting time, was beginning to have doubts, but ignored them both. She had learned long ago that understanding came from patience, not from rushing. On the 8th day, she asked for copies of all the tablets to be displayed in her workspace. There were 147 of them, each one different from all the others. Spent hours walking between them, looking for similarities and differences that no one else had noticed. On the 12th day, she started making notes, not translations, just observations. She noticed that some symbols appeared in clusters, never alone. She noticed that certain patterns seemed to carry emotional weight, appearing more often at the beginning and end of texts. She noticed that the writing on some tablets was neat and careful, while on others it was rushed and messy. These tablets were written over many years, she told when he came to check on her progress. Some of them were written when the writers were calm and thoughtful. Others were written in moments of strong emotion. You can see it in the way the symbols are formed. That is interesting, but how does it help us translate them? It tells me that these were real people with real lives, not just specimens or artifacts, people who felt things deeply enough to write them down. That matters. It matters a lot. On the 17th day, made her first breakthrough. She had been studying the central tablet, the one that belonged to the elderly. She had been looking at a cluster of symbols that appeared several times throughout the text. The cluster was always the same, but it appeared in different contexts. Sometimes it was at the beginning of a passage. Sometimes it was at the end. Sometimes it stood alone. Realized that the cluster was not a word, it was a name. She signed her entries, told excitedly. Like signing a letter, this cluster here, it is her name, or maybe not her official name, but a name she called herself in private, a secret identity that she used when she was being honest with herself. Examine the cluster, how can you be sure? Because of where it appears, always at the end of sections like a signature, and look at the way it is written. It is more careful than the other symbols, more deliberate. She took her time with this one. It mattered to her. What does it say? I do not know yet, but I know what it represents. It represents her, the real her, the person she was when no one else was watching. From that point, progress came faster. Once had identified the name cluster, she could use it as a reference point for understanding other symbols. She began to see patterns that had been invisible before. Some symbols always appeared near the name cluster. These were probably words related to self-identity. I, me, myself. Other symbols appeared in pairs, one positive and one negative, suggesting opposites, happy and sad, love and hate, hope and fear. Started building a map of the code, connecting symbols to concepts based on their relationships to each other. It was not a translation, not yet. It was more like a skeleton, a framework that would eventually support the full meaning of the text. On the 21st day, she translated her first complete sentence. It said, "Today I feel like the ocean when no one is watching." Stared at the translation for a long time. It was not a statement of fact. It was not a record of events. It was poetry, pure, beautiful, heartbreaking poetry. She called to her workspace and showed him the translation. The old stood very still, reading the words over and over again. "I do not understand," he said finally. "What does it mean to feel like the ocean when no one is watching?" "It means she felt vast and powerful and free when she was alone," said. "When no one was watching her, she could be her true self. She was not bound by the expectations of her family or her society. She was just herself." That is a very human interpretation. Maybe, but I think it is also a very interpretation. They were social creatures, always surrounded by others. Being alone must have felt strange and wonderful at the same time, like being the ocean when no one is watching. Over the next several days, translated more sentences. Each one was like a window into the soul of a person who had been dead for 8,000 years. The grandmother wrote about her children, and about the joy they brought her and the burden they sometimes were. She wrote about memories of her youth, about loves lost and opportunities missed. She wrote about the fear of death and the hope for something beyond. But the thing that appeared most often in her writing was loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of being surrounded by people who did not really know you. The loneliness of wearing a mask every day and never being able to take it off. Understood that loneliness. She had felt it herself during long deployments in foreign countries, surrounded by soldiers who depended on her but did not know her. The grandmother's words spoke to something deep inside her, something she had never been able to express. On the 28th day, completed the first full translation of a tablet. It was a letter to the grandmother's family meant to be read after her death. But of course, no one had ever read it because no one could understand the code. The grandmother had written her deepest truths knowing that they would die with her. Until now. Stood in the main chamber of the archive, facing an audience of senior officials and representatives from a dozen other species. Had insisted on this presentation. He wanted the galaxy to see what the humans had accomplished. But did not feel proud. She felt sad. Sad that it had taken so long for someone to listen to what the grandmother had to say. "The tablets," she began, "are not historical records or religious texts. They are private journals, written in personal codes by individuals who needed a place to express their true selves. For 8,000 years, their voices have been silent. Today, I will share one of those voices with you." She touched a control, and the grandmother's letter appeared on the main display, translated into standard Galactic. This is a letter from an elderly woman to her family. She wrote it knowing that no one would ever read it. She was wrong. Began to read. "My beloved ones, who will never read these words. I have kept this journal for 60 years, writing in a language that only I can understand. I created this language because I needed a place where I could be honest. Our people value connection above all things. We live together, eat together, sleep together, share everything together. But there are some things that cannot be shared, some feelings that cannot be spoken aloud. I love you, all of you, my children, my great. You are the light of my life and the joy of my heart. But there are times when I have wanted to run away from you, times when your love felt like chains around my soul, times when I looked at you and felt like a stranger in my own family. This does not mean my love is false. It means my love is complicated, Real love is always complicated. It has room for joy and sorrow, connection and loneliness, gratitude and resentment. I have felt all of these things, sometimes in the same moment. You knew me as mother and grandmother. You knew me as teacher and advisor, but you did not know me as myself. You did not know the dreams I never pursued, the words I never spoke, the person I never became. That person exists only in these pages, in this code that will die with me. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps some truths are too heavy to share. Perhaps there are parts of ourselves that must remain private, even from those we love most. But if somehow, someday, someone reads these words, I want you to know that I was more than what I showed the world. I was complicated and contradictory and full of feelings that did not always make sense. I was imperfect. I was struggling. I was trying my best. And I loved you, despite everything, because of everything, through everything. I loved you more than I can express in any language, coded or clear. May you find the peace that I have found at the end of my days. Your grandmother. The chamber was silent when finished reading. She looked out at the assembled officials and saw something she had not expected. Many of them were crying, with their blue skin and 4 arms, tall, thin with their silver eyes, massive with their stone-like faces, all of them moved by the words of a grandmother who had been dead for 8,000 years. Stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. 300 years, he said. 300 years we have studied these tablets, and we never understood what they were. We thought they were puzzles to be solved. We did not realize they were people to be heard. He turned to, on behalf of the Linguistic Collective and the Galactic Archive, I thank you. You have given voice to the voiceless. You have brought the dead back to life. Shook her head. I did not bring her back to life. She was always alive in those tablets. I just learned to listen. Later that night, sat alone in her workspace, surrounded by the holographic images of 147 tablets. She had translated one. There were 146 more waiting. 146 more voices waiting to be heard. The door opened and entered. He looked tired, older than he had seemed when first arrived. You could return to Earth now, he said. You have accomplished what you came to do. Your name will be remembered for centuries. Did not look up from the tablets. These are not monuments, counselor. They are people. I cannot leave them unheard. It will take years to translate them all, perhaps decades. I have time. Finally looked at him. I spent 22 years listening to the secrets of enemies. Maybe I should spend the rest of my life listening to the secrets of friends. Was quiet for a moment. Why do you care so much? These have been dead for 8,000 years. Nothing you do can help them. That is not true. Stood and walked to the display case where the original tablets were kept. When I was deployed, I lost friends, good people who died in bad places. After they were gone, I used to read their letters, their journals, anything they left behind. It felt like a way to keep them alive, a way to honor who they really were, not just the soldiers they had been. She touched the case gently. These were people. They had lives, dreams, fears, loves. They deserved to be remembered as more than just a puzzle. They deserved to have their stories told. And you are the one to tell them. Someone has to be. Why not me? Made the gesture of respect, pressing all 4 of his hands together. You are a remarkable person. I am glad the humans sent you. Smiled. I am glad they sent me too. She turned back to the tablets and pulled up the next one she planned to work on. It belonged to a young, based on the handwriting. Someone just starting their life, full of questions and uncertainties. This one looks interesting, said. I wonder what they had to say. She sat down and began to study the symbols, looking for patterns, looking for the person hiding inside the code. Somewhere in the archive, a clock chimed the late hour. Did not notice. She was too busy listening to voices that had been waiting 8,000 years to be heard. In the weeks that followed, developed a method for translating the tablets that was different from anything they had tried before. She did not start with the symbols. She started with the person. Each tablet had been found in a specific location with specific objects nearby. Use this information to build a profile of the writer. Were they young or old, rich or poor, happy or sad? What did they value? What did they fear? Once she had a sense of the person, she could begin to understand their code. She looked for emotional patterns, not linguistic ones. She asked herself, if I were this person, what would I need to express? What would I hide? What would I celebrate? It was not a scientific method. It could not be measured but it worked. Tablet by tablet, voice by voice, brought the back to life. There was the young man who wrote about falling in love with someone his family would not approve of. His words were passionate and desperate, full of longing for a future that he knew would never come. There was the middle-aged woman who wrote about her work as an artist, creating beautiful things that no one else appreciated. She poured her frustration and her pride into her journal, documenting every piece she made and every criticism she received. There was the child who wrote about nightmares, terrified of the dark, creating a secret language just to express fears that they could not share with their parents. Each tablet was different, each code was unique, but they all shared the same need, the need to be honest in a society that demanded constant connection, constant sharing, constant openness. They had created a way to be alone together. They had built a private space in the midst of a communal world, and in doing so, they had preserved something precious, the truth of who they really were. Understood this better than anyone. She had spent her entire adult life in organizations that demanded loyalty and sacrifice. The military had given her purpose and community, but it had also taken things from her. Her arm, obviously, but also her ability to be fully honest with the people around her. There were things she had seen and done that she could never talk about, not even with her closest friends. The grandmother had known that feeling. So had the young man, the frustrated artist, the frightened child. They had all carried secrets that could not be shared. But now those secrets were being heard, and began to realize that translation was not just about language, it was about connection. It was about reaching across time and space to say, I see you, I hear you, you are not alone. 6 months after arrived on Prime, she had translated 23 tablets. The translations had been published throughout the Galactic Cooperative, and they had caused a sensation. People of all species were fascinated by the voices, by their struggles and hopes and fears. But more than that, they were fascinated by what the tablets revealed about the nature of consciousness itself. Here was proof that 8,000 years ago, on a planet far away, beings had felt the same things that people felt today. Loneliness, love, fear, hope. The specific circumstances were different, but the emotions were the same. The tablets showed that sentient beings, no matter how different they looked or where they came from, were all connected by shared experiences of being alive. Was sitting in her workspace late one night when found her. The young had become something like a friend over the past months, helping with research and bringing her food when she forgot to eat. You have been working for 16 hours, said. You need to rest. Just a little longer. Was staring at a tablet that had been giving her trouble. It was different from the others. The code was more complex, the emotions more layered. She felt like there was something important hiding in the symbols, something that she could not quite see. Looked at the tablet over shoulder. Whose is this one? I do not know. It was found separately from the others, in a structure that might have been a temple or a community center. Somewhere public, not private. That is what makes it strange. Strange how? All the other tablets were personal journals kept in private spaces, but this one was kept somewhere that everyone could see. Frowned. Why would someone keep a private code in a public place? Maybe it was not private. Maybe it was meant to be read by others. Shook her head. No, it is definitely a personal code. I can see the emotional patterns, but she trailed off thinking. But what? But the emotions are different. In the other tablets, the writers are talking to themselves. They are processing their own feelings, working through their own thoughts. This one is different. This one is talking to someone else. Sat down next to who? Everyone. Eyes widened as she suddenly understood. This tablet was not a private journal. It was a message. A message meant for anyone who could decode it. A message left for the future. She began working with renewed energy, her fingers flying over the controls as she pulled up analysis files and comparison charts. The code in this tablet was more sophisticated than the others, designed not just to be private, but to be meaningful even without context. It took her 3 more days to translate it. When she was done, she called and asked him to come to her workspace immediately. The old arrived looking curious and slightly worried. "What have you found?" Took a deep breath. "I know why they disappeared." The tablet had been written by someone called the Speaker, a title rather than a name. The Speaker had been a leader of some kind, someone whose job was to communicate between different communities. The message was addressed to anyone in the future who might find it and understand it. It began with an apology for the complexity of the code, explaining that the Speaker had to make it difficult enough that casual readers would not understand, but simple enough that a determined translator could eventually decode it. Then the Speaker explained what had happened to the. They had not died. They had not been killed by war or disease or natural disaster. They had left. For thousands of years, they had struggled with the tension between their social nature and their need for privacy. They were a species that craved connection, but they also needed space to be themselves. Their personal codes had been a solution, but an imperfect one. As their civilization grew, the pressure increased. More people, more connection, less privacy. Finally, a group of scientists had developed a technology that allowed consciousness to exist without a physical body. It was not death. It was transformation. They could become beings of pure thought, connected to each other in ways that transcended physical space, but also able to maintain perfect privacy when they chose. The entire species had agreed to undergo the transformation. They had spent decades preparing, building the machines that would change them, writing the codes that would preserve their individual identities. And then, one day, they had all stepped into the light and become something new. The Speaker had been the last one to transform. They had stayed behind to leave this message, to explain to anyone who came after what they had done and why. "We are not gone," the Speaker had written. "We have just become something different. We still exist, but in a form you cannot see or touch. We watch over the universe we left behind. We remember what we were. We honor what we have become. If you are reading this, you have proven yourself worthy of understanding. You have looked beyond language to find meaning. You have reached across time to touch another soul. This is the greatest gift one being can give to another. Take what you have learned here and use it wisely. Remember that every mind is a universe unto itself. Remember that connection and privacy are not opposites but partners. Remember that the truest communication happens not when we share everything, but when we share what matters most. We are still here, we are still watching, and we are proud of you for listening. With hope for your future." The Speaker, when finished reading, was silent for a very long time. His blue skin had gone pale, and his 4 hands were trembling slightly. "They are still alive," he said finally. "They are still alive." In a way, yes. If the Speaker was telling the truth, they transformed into something we cannot perceive. They might be all around us right now, watching, listening. This changes everything. Looked at with wonder in his eyes. For 300 years, we thought we were studying a dead civilization, but we were actually studying the childhood of a species that had evolved beyond our understanding. Nodded. That is what makes the personal tablets so important. They are not just historical documents. They are records of the beings that they used to be before they became something else. They are memories of a past life, left behind for those who would come after. And you found them, you gave them voice, made the gesture of respect again, more deeply than before. You have done something remarkable, something that will change the way the galaxy thinks about consciousness, about communication, about the meaning of existence itself. Looked back at the translated message, at the words of the speaker that had waited 8,000 years to be read. I did not do anything special, she said. I just listened. That is all anyone can do. Listen and try to understand. The news of the speaker's message spread across the galactic cooperative like wildfire. Scientists, philosophers, religious leaders, ordinary citizens, everyone had an opinion about what it meant. Some believed there were still watching, guardian spirits looking after the universe. Others thought the speaker had been lying, creating a comforting myth to explain their species' disappearance. Still others began searching for ways to communicate with the transformed, hoping to make contact with beings of pure consciousness. Did not participate in these debates. She had done her job. She had translated the tablets and shared what she had found. What people did with that information was up to them. Instead, she continued working on the remaining tablets. There were still more than 100 voices waiting to be heard, and she intended to hear them all. One evening, about a year after she had arrived on Prime, was walking through the archive when she came upon a section she had never visited before. It was a memorial hall, filled with statues and plaques honoring beings who had contributed to the archive over the. In a corner of the hall, she found a new addition. It was a simple stone tablet, carved with symbols that she recognized immediately. It was written in impersonal code. But it was not an ancient artifact. It was new. Someone had carved it recently, using the translation methods that had developed to write in the style. She studied the symbols for a moment, then smiled as she deciphered the message. To who taught us to listen, may your voice be heard across all time and space. With gratitude, the Galactic Archive. Stood there for a long time, looking at the tablet that had been created in her honor. She thought about the grandmother who had written her private thoughts 8,000 years ago, never dreaming that anyone would read them. She thought about the speaker, leaving a message for a future that might never come. She thought about all the lonely voices that had waited in silence for someone to understand. And she thought about herself, a soldier who had lost her arm and found her purpose, a translator who had spoken for those who could no longer speak for themselves. A bridge between past and future, between species, between different ways of being alive. She reached out and touched the tablet gently, feeling the rough surface of the newly carved stone. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for listening." Then she turned and walked back to her workspace, where more tablets were waiting, more voices, more stories, more connections to be made across the vast silence of time. The work would continue. It would always continue, because as long as there were stories to be told and ears to hear them, the conversation between beings, whether they were human or something else entirely, would never truly end. And somewhere, perhaps in a realm beyond physical form, they were listening. They were watching as their childhood voices were finally heard. They were smiling, in whatever way beings of pure consciousness smile, knowing that their message had been received. The dead language was not dead after all. It was just waiting for someone who knew how to listen, and had learned to listen better than anyone.